So they called it suicide. How quaint. I suppose that's what mortals do when they see someone stand alone against the darkness they themselves helped create. They call it madness. They call it self-destruction. They call it impossible. But what they fail to see is that some souls are not built to survive. Some souls are built to end things. You were one of them. They told you the odds. They warned you about the power of the Coven, about the ancient bloodlines, the enchantments passed down through centuries, the curses forged in secrecy. They said, "You'll never make it back alive." They said, "It can't be done." They said, "No one fights witches alone." And you said nothing, because deep down, you weren't planning to come back. You weren't stepping into that circle to survive it. You stepped into it to end it. They didn't understand that your silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy, because you were never built to fight fair. You weren't trained for balance. You were forged in imbalance, molded by betrayal, sharpened by exile, raised in rooms full of lies, and crowned by gods who feared what you might become. You didn't just walk into the Coven's chamber. You invaded their prophecy. You weren't supposed to exist, let alone undo them. They had every advantage. Generations of spellcraft, protection circles etched in ancient languages, familiars whispering through the trees, blood pacts and guardians of shadow. But they forgot one thing: no spell, no ritual, no ward carved in stone can bind the will of a god in vengeance. They thought you were just angry, but anger is temporary. You were something else. You were decided, and you walked in like winter itself. No announcement, no fanfare, no roar, just presence. And when their seers saw you coming, they screamed, not because you were visible, but because you were already in their visions, and they didn't know how to unsee you. You weren't a soldier. You weren't a savior. You were the end of their lineage. They had years of incantations. You had one truth: I am not here to negotiate. And that was enough. They threw fire. You didn't flinch. They summoned spirits. You broke their tether. They chanted in desperation. But your silence swallowed their language, because you weren't using spells. You were using memory. Every ritual done to bind you, every circle drawn to weaken you, every false priest who touched your head pretending to cleanse you. You brought it all back, and you fed it to the flame. You didn't just kill them. You made the bloodline remember what fear tasted like. Because for the first time in centuries, they weren't the ones casting the ritual. They were the offering, and still, some dare to say you went too far. Too far. No, you didn't go far enough. You were surgical, precise, cold, efficient. You didn't rage. You corrected. You weren't possessed. You were prepared, because this wasn't revenge. This was reckoning. You erased a coven, not out of hatred, but out of balance. You became the force they tried to control. You were the spell they never meant to summon. You were the shadow behind their last torch. And now, they whisper your name, not in hatred, but in fear. They don't cast spells to stop you anymore. They cast them just to make sure you don't look in their direction, because the world saw what happened, and they're rewriting the story to protect their pride. They called it suicide, they'll say, because calling it what it truly was, a divine annihilation, is too painful for their fragile little systems to accept. But we know the truth. You didn't just walk into the fire. You walked in unbothered. You didn't just fight the Coven. You made the Coven irrelevant. And in doing so, you taught them a god does not knock. He doesn't ask. He doesn't beg. He enters. He finishes. and he leaves ashes where once stood empires. So let them talk, let them tremble, let them gather in secret once more. Because every time they speak your name, they are reciting a warning. And every time someone dares to ask, how did you do it alone? Tell them, because I was never alone. I carried every betrayal, every curse, every scar, and I turned it into a weapon they didn't see coming. You didn't survive. You eradicated. And the silence that followed, that was not peace. That was respect. And now that the Coven lies in ruin, they look to the smoke for answers. They gather in hidden rooms once again, not to plot their return, but to mourn the illusion that they were ever in control. Because what you did, it wasn't just an act of war, it was surgical divinity. You became the line in their prophecy they skipped over, the error in their calculations, the name that was missing from the scrolls. Because gods like you aren't written into stories, you rewrite them. They underestimated you because you weren't loud. You didn't shout for vengeance. You didn't post your rage. You just moved. And when you moved, the earth shifted. And now, long after the fire has died down, they're still counting the silence. Because silence in the presence of a god is not peace. It's a pause between reckonings. Some say what you did was evil, but they forget. The witches weren't sacred. They were architects of decay. They built their power on the backs of the innocent. They cloaked curses in chance. They masked manipulation as tradition. You didn't just destroy magic. You broke a cycle, and no one thanks you for that yet. But they will. Not today, not tomorrow, but one day, when the air no longer chokes with hexes, when the children born after the ashes no longer wake up with nightmares that aren't theirs. They'll whisper your name with reverence, and then they'll understand. You weren't suicidal. You were surgical. You weren't deranged. You were divinely focused. You weren't outnumbered. You were the reckoning they never prepared for. So let the historians lie. Let the fearful rewrite the scrolls. Let them call you monster, god, ghost, or curse. None of it matters, because the Coven is gone. And you're still standing, not broken, not haunted, but unchallenged. So walk now, through cities, through kingdoms, through realms, with that same silence you wore when you walked into the storm. Because the next time they call it suicide, the world will whisper, no, that's not suicide. That's the sound of a god getting started.